Thousands of restrictive laws govern people who've been released from prison in the United States, making it difficult for them to find housing, employment, and to restart life after they've done their time. Through personal stories, we hear about the struggles people face after being released from prison. We also hear about the trauma that contributed to their incarceration. And you can see the firsthand documentaries and firsthand talks on our website at WTTW.com/firsthand. Here's one of our next guests talking about his own life experiences.
My smile as a kid belies the trauma of domestic violence that in my childhood I couldn't escape from. At the age of 4, I witnessed my mother thrown over a third-story roof. Having to see her body lying among the weeds behind my grandmother's home changed me. I'm thankful my mother didn't die that day, but the trauma and the violence did not stop for us. My mother would later marry the man who threw her over that roof.
Joining us to discuss the challenges of life after prison are Orlando Mayorga, Reentry Policy Coordinator for Illinois Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, and Nika Jones-Tapia, clinical psychologist and managing director of Justice Initiatives for Chicago Beyond. Before that, she was warden of the Cook County Jail. Thanks to you both for joining us. Orlando, you know, we hear you telling that traumatic story of your childhood, and we see your mother in the audience, obviously very emotional at that retelling. Once you were a teenager, you joined a gang. This led to your eventual incarceration. Would you tell us what happened?
I guess that episode began in my childhood. I spoke to the trauma of growing up in a home where domestic violence was a norm. I ended up gravitating towards the street life in my early teens and kept making bad decision after bad decision. It eventually led to an altercation in which I was under the influence of drugs, and as I spoke in the talk, I pointed a gun at another teenager and fired. And you know, at the time, I didn't know that I had harmed anyone. It wasn't until the next day that I received a phone call that told me that I had actually harmed someone in the worst of ways and had taken a life. And in that instant, it was definitely a shock. And I remember the first thing I did was start to cry because in my childhood, the one voice that was a constant wasn't my mother, it was my grandmother. And she would always take me to church, and I would always hear that one of those sins that any human being can commit, that was the worst of them, was to commit murder. And I just remember hearing her voice in my head and crying, knowing that I had done a very terrible thing.
And of course, you were incarcerated and then released in 2017. So I'm fast forwarding a good bit, obviously, but what are some of the challenges that you faced upon returning to the community?
I think the hardest thing for me was adjusting emotionally to my relationships. One of the things that incarceration does is that it destroys your relationships going into the system with family, friends, loved ones. And then again, once you come home, it's hard to maintain a relationship with a mother that you see maybe once every 2 months, sometimes once every 6 months, depending on what prison you're in Illinois. With my brothers, and I'm the oldest of 4 siblings, so I wasn't able to maintain a strong bond with my brothers, who at the time were 1 and 2.5 when I was incarcerated. My sister was a little older, but even then, I wasn't able to maintain that contact with them because of the distance and really the expense that it places on a family to have to maintain a relationship.
You also talk about, you know, your family receiving anonymous threats and, you know, through calls and through the mail. And Nika, you're familiar with the devastating effect that incarceration has on communities, both through your professional life and personally. Your father was in prison when you were 8 years old. How did that impact you personally, of course, but then your career path?
I think the incarceration of my father and a few other men in my family it opened up the door for me to see early on that the carceral system wasn't established to help people to thrive. It actually tore individuals and families and large communities apart. And I also realized at an early age that the people who were locked behind these walls were deserving of something more. And that ultimately, I think, led to my decision to want to go into a career in mental health, specifically in correctional institutions.
Of course, you devoted yourself, as you say, to improving mental health services in correctional institutions, both for inmates and for staff. Here's a part of a talk that you gave, as we mentioned, as part of WTTW's First Hand Initiative.
There is no one story that captures the mirrored experiences of people incarcerated in this system and the staff who work in it. Each of these groups is dealing with the pain inflicted on them from this system. Yet they are taught to view each other as the enemy, rendering them incapable of challenging the real enemy, the system itself and the trauma it causes.
Nika, how does life inside prison change people, both the staff and the people who are incarcerated?
It makes life more difficult. You know, there is, as you heard in the talk, there's an overwhelming amount of trauma that everyone in that system experiences, yet they're not oftentimes given the resources or the tools that they need to mitigate the effects of that trauma. And so what we end up seeing is staff have high rates of substance use, high rates of divorce, high rates of suicidality. Correctional staff actually live an average of 10 to 15 years less than people in the general population. Very similar story for people who are incarcerated, though I would say much worse. People who are incarcerated they lose an average of 2 years, I believe, off of their lifespan for every 1 year that they are incarcerated. They also have high rates of substance use, marital issues. I mean, we have to do something on the front end of this system to really disrupt what we know the system actually causes.
Orlando, how did you heal from your childhood trauma, your experience with incarceration, to be to a place where you are today, where you can help others?
I think most of it came from having peer support, having strong male role models who I adopted as father figures and brothers in my life who helped me to not only to see that I needed to make a change, but to continue to instill in me a notion of what community could look like, and to really myself to be able to model that through opportunities that were created for me through education pathways and programming, that I was privileged to be in spaces where they were available that added to that peer support that I received.
That group was called CAVE.
Yes.
What does that stand for?
Community Anti-Violence Education. And that program itself was created by the incarcerated men at Danville Correctional Center who saw a need not only to address the violence that was happening in our communities, but also to begin healing from the trauma we ourselves had not yet been able to unpack on our own.
And of course, you're working today with the Lieutenant Governor's office. Tell us about your role as the reentry coordinator there.
So my role now is to be able to look at policy and to be able to infuse a restorative and transformative lens in some of the initiatives that are coming out of the Lieutenant Governor's office. One being the Healing Beyond Harm Restorative Justice Pilot, which is taking place in 2 facilities in Illinois, and that is offering a pathway to healing for survivors in the community who have lost family members or who have suffered harm as a result of violence in the community.
And what sort of assistance is the state able to provide people who are reentering or formerly incarcerated?
Well, the Office of Lieutenant Governor is not a direct service provider, but one of the things that I do within my capacity as the policy coordinator is to be able to reach out to community-based organizations and build partnerships with our state agencies that do. For example, the State ID program, which provides state IDs for every for people who are reentering from incarceration from the Illinois Department of Corrections. An ID is not the answer to everything, but it provides a leg up for people that are hoping to engage employment, hoping to engage direct services, or even education pathways. And again, the Healing Beyond Harm program is an initiative that is bringing together our community-based stakeholder at Adler University's Institute of Public Safety and Social Justice, along with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and the Illinois Prisoner Review Board.
Nika, in about 30 seconds as we wrap it up, what do you no, it's not you at all. What do you wish, what would you like viewers to better understand about the criminal justice system, and what needs to be done to better serve the population that's reentering?
I like for us to understand that incarceration isn't the answer, and instead it has massive negative impact to people, families, and larger communities, to all of us really. And instead of using incarceration as the only tool to some of the societal ills we experience, we really have to help people to thrive in community.
Perfect place to leave it. We'll have to leave it there. Nika Jones-Tapia, Orlando Mayorga, thank you both for joining us. And you can visit our website to learn more about our guests, hear their talks, and read about our firsthand Life After Prison series. It is all at WTTW.com/firsthand. Up next, 2 personal stories about overcoming hurdles after incarceration. Stay with us. Being incarcerated at the age of 18 means that when you're released 24 years later, the person walking out of prison may still be, in some ways, a teenager. Sometimes leaving prison leads to an unexpected journey, helping to serve the very people who are suffering as you once were when you were sent to prison. Our next guests had such unexpected journeys and challenges, but continue to push for a better life. Joining us to share their journeys of life after prison are Tawana Pope, founder of the nonprofit Diamonds in the Making Outreach and author of the book My Exodus, Walking Through the Wilderness to Collide with Destiny, and Nick Creighton, who was released from prison just last year from a unique prison, the Life Skills Reentry Center in Kewanee, Illinois. Thanks to you both for joining us and sharing your stories. Nick, as we mentioned, you've been out of prison for just over 4 months after having been incarcerated for 24 years. 18 years old when you went in. You're now 42 years old. Here's a look at what some of these early days have been like for you.
Yeah, this is awkward. Sitting in a restaurant, like, I don't even remember the last restaurant I was in pre-arrest. Emotionally, I'm still an 18-year-old kid. So right now, I'm kind of nervous, like I'm by myself. Everywhere I've been accompanied or chaperoned with somebody. And so, you know, obviously it's the work week. People have to go to work. All right, thank you. The other night, I don't get anxiety. I'm not an anxious person, but I start feeling myself, my alarm going off in my brain saying, it's time to go lock up. It's almost 9:30. You know, be aware, you know. And then I had to tell myself, there isn't a count time, there isn't a guard or an officer. You don't have to be in the house at 9:30. So these are the things that I'm trying to learn how to recondition, because they're embedded, you know.
Shift in mindset for you, Nick. How have you been adjusting these last 4 months?
Well, first, thanks for having me here. I think I've been doing pretty good. A lot of my family and friends are like, whoa, you're moving pretty fast. You might want to slow down. But for me, I'm just rebuilding what I squandered 24 years ago. And I think I've been doing pretty good. Nothing has really tripped me up majorly, you know, small nuances, things that you all take for granted day to day. But it's been pretty good. People have been helpful. And so I'm grateful for that.
When you say rebuilding, what does that look like for you? What does that include?
Well, for me, getting my driver's license for the first time in my life at 42 years old. When I went there, they were like, how is it that you never had a license? Like, this is ridiculous. And so I had to be forthcoming and say, well, I was incarcerated. This is why I've never had a license. And so people were kind of taken aback, but they were understanding. So things like that, understanding how to pay for a credit card, you know, insurance, the normal day-to-day things that you would learn at 18, 21, paying rent online and doing all of these things online. So all of these things are new for me, And so, like I said, I'm not playing catch up, but just rebuilding that which I'm behind on after all this time.
Tawana, in your documentary, you tell the story of how you spent time in and out of jail. What was your experience like when you were in jail, and how did that impact you?
Jail is something that would change your life forever. Let me first say thank you for allowing us to be on this platform. And in and out of jail and having children being incarcerated is a big impact on your life. It's something that would never be erased. It'll always have that stigma of what has happened, and you'll always remember, you know, what has happened. And you got to make a decision. Am I going to stay stuck? Or am I going to put one foot in front of the other and continue to rebuild from that broken place to create something beautiful by changing who I am from the inside out?
What was the moment that you knew that you needed to make a change?
That last time when I went in and I said, God, if you get me up out of here, I'm never coming back. Because I was in there with a young lady who had committed a murder, and then they put me in a cell with her. I'm like, oh, okay, you help me, God. I don't ever want to come back here.
Tawana, here's a bit of your documentary as well. Let's take a look.
For me, that breaking point, it was me sick and tired of being tired of disappointing my children. One day I wasn't hiding. I looked in their face. I really saw their soul in what I was doing to them.
Really? Mama, be still. I am here still, Mama.
I didn't understand that every time I got high, my children did too. Every time I got incarcerated, my children did too. Every time I didn't show up, they missed out too. So I was repeating the cycle that was done to me and didn't even know it.
I want to talk about that cycle, if you would, and your experiences growing up that led to the choices you made.
Well, I'm the oldest of 10, and my mom was a 40-year addict. And it was like I became this person that I didn't sign up for. You know, I'm a mom of kids, and I never had a pregnancy. And so a lot of the things that I endured as being the older sibling, you know, having to, you know, do things strange for some change, to make sure they ate, to make sure that, you know, they had the things that they needed, and putting everything that made me me aside because I had these children that was looking at me for dear life. And I had to show up for them in spite of, you know, how I felt. A lot of things were buried inside because of the dysfunctional part of the family. You know, yes, families say they'll be there, but when the actual time shows up, nobody's there. You know, I didn't really have a relationship with God. So, you know, it was like I was just by myself trying to figure this thing out.
Nick, you were in the Kewanee Life Skills Center. You spent your last, how many months before you were released?
18.
18 months, so a year and a half. What has that meant for you, and how's that been helpful since you've been out on these last 4 months?
Well, entering into that experiment, it was something new that the Department of Corrections was trying to give us that has never been done in corrections. You have Warden Carruthers there who is absolutely progressive, and they took a chance. You know, I'm a convicted murderer, and so they actually, the city of Kewanee changed their laws so that I could step outside of the facility and go into their town and actually have a real job. So I worked for Public Works. And that experience really changed the scope of everything that I thought I knew release would be like. And so I think implementing more programs like that in the existing facilities that we have would be so much more impactful because you wouldn't have the recidivism rate that you have, because people would understand what it means to come home to something.
Tawana, you've earned a master's degree since your time in jail. How's that been helpful for you in what you're doing with your life today?
Very helpful. During the time where me and my children were trying to rebuild from that broken place, I had never worked a job over $8 an hour trying to raise 2 male children. So, you know, it made it kind of hard. You have to choose between a bill and what you're going to do for your child. Getting my master's opened so many different opportunities for me now that I have attained my LSW as well this July.
Licensed clinical social worker?
Yes. So now that I'm working in a field with homeless men and women who are veterans, with substance abuse issues. It's rewarding. It's rewarding. You know, you go back to the place where God gave you that lifeline and you give it to somebody else, and that's how you keep the gift going round and round.
About 30 seconds left. Nick, I'm going to give you the last word. How do you want people to know that you're a different person today from the one who was incarcerated 24 years ago?
Well, I mean, look at my performance while I was incarcerated. You know, some people say past performance tells you future performance, but you can just look at the things that I've done since I've been free. I mean, obviously, I'm not 18 anymore, but if you believe in people changing, if you want to believe that people aren't who they say they were 24 years ago, then you have to give us a chance. That comes with trust. And this is what we do every day, stepping out and helping these kids and helping these communities and rebuilding that which we stole.
Okay. Nick Creighton, Tawana Pope, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And you can visit our website to learn more about our Firsthand Life After Prison series, where you can also watch the documentaries featuring our guests. It is all at WTTW.com/firsthand. And we're back to wrap things up, but first, a look at the weather. And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 10. Lawmakers return to Springfield ahead of Governor Pritzker's budget address. And we break down the city's newly proposed and lucrative contract for ComEd. Now, for all of us here at WTTW News and Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to be a multilingual law firm that provides translators for a variety of languages.
They are intelligent, resourceful, and remarkably resilient, no matter where they live and what unique challenges they face. Whether they work as a team or go it alone, they will come out on top. These are Dogs in the Wild.
Wednesday at 7 on WTTW.
In the ancient Amazon, who lived there?
It had been assumed that the Amazon was pretty much untouched nature.
But now, breathtaking finds
it was some sort of urban complex.
reveal Ice Age societies, agriculture, and mysterious structures.
It's one of the most important archaeological sites that we have in the Americas.
Ancient Builders of the Amazon on Nova.